Welcome to Epicure Creative. Today we're going to make homemade tofu, and this is a continuation of our previous recipe, and that preparation was to make homemade soy milk. So the entire yield for the soy milk recipe should yield 2 quarts, which is the exact quantity that is needed to make the homemade tofu. So our ingredients for making the homemade tofu are our 2 quarts of our soy milk and Nigari crystals, which are a coagulant that are dissolved in some filtered water. And these are our only ingredients. Tools that we need to make our tofu are a wooden spoon for stirring during the coagulation process, a tofu specific mold or an equivalent set up with cheesecloth, an appropriately sized pan that will be used to press the tofu, to press the curds and release some of the whey. We'll also be putting a weight on top of this. A ladle for removing excess whey, and a fine mesh strainer to capture the curds as we do so. And we also have this that's going to be used to remove any formation of skin that comes to the surface. In addition to that, we also want to have an appropriately sized pot with a tightly fitting lid as well. The first step here is to take both of our quarts of soy milk, add them to our pot, and over medium-high heat, we are just going to heat up the soy milk. And I'm going to stir it while doing so to keep the proteins from forming any kind of skin on top. It may happen anyway, which is natural, but I have a skimming tool at the ready in case I need to take off that skin. The appropriate temperature that we want to get our soy milk to is just before it comes to a simmer. If it comes to a simmer, that's okay, but it's not necessary to get it quite that hot. So no convectionary movement, just nice and hot. And now what we want to do is we want to get this milk moving using a figure 8 motion with our wooden spoon. And we want to do this 6 or 8 times and develop good motion before we start adding our coagulant, which we're going to do in thirds. All right, now that our milk is moving, I'm going to start adding our coagulant. Keep it moving. And now that that is incorporated, what I'm going to do is just take the spoon out and cover it for about 10 seconds. And now I am going to add about a third more of our coagulant. It's on the surface. And now I'm going to cover this pot again for about 3 minutes. Okay, our 3 minutes are up, so I'm going to remove the lid. And at this point, we can observe the coagulation that's taking place. You can see that it's considerably thicker. You can see some separation here of the whey or water from the curds. And so what I'm going to do now is I am going to just trace a back and forth pattern across the topmost portion a few times. This is going to help us develop our curds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the rest of our coagulant. just to the surface. I am not going to stir it now because I don't want to break up our curds too much. I want there to be large enough curds and enough structure to create a good texture. And now we're going to cover this again for another couple of minutes. After we've added our last third of coagulant and let it sit for a couple minutes, we're just going to take a quick look at our formation of curds here, which looks good. There's a couple uneven areas you can see around the sides of the pot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stir around the sides for about 20 seconds just to facilitate the coagulation of the curds in that area. Just going to let it sit for a moment more so they can develop a little bit before we start to strain the whey from the curds and press those curds into our molds. Now we're ready to strain the curds from our whey and press our curds into a mold to make a nice block of tofu. And you can see here there's really good distinction between the whey or the liquid and the curds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ladle very carefully and just put our curds in the strainer to remove some of our whey before we can put it into our mold. Now we have our curds strained from our whey, and we are ready to put this into our mold and press it and allow it to set up into a block. I put our makeshift tofu mold into a larger pan just to catch some additional whey that might press out and come up over the sides. I'm putting our weight on top. And generally speaking, the heavier the weight and the longer that it sits with that weight on it for, the firmer the tofu will be. There are different styles of tofu. There's very soft and creamy tofu. There's firm tofu, there's extra firm tofu. So we're gonna let this sit with a 1 pound, this is 1 pound and 12 ounces, this is what this container weighs, for about 15 minutes and then check our firmness then. Now we're going to attempt to unmold our tofu. I'm taking the weight off. And so by giving it a gentle press, I can see that it's nice and firm. Sometimes it needs to be refrigerated or cooled down for a period of time before you can handle it. But this is actually just right. It's a nice, pliable, medium firm texture. This is just right. And so by sliding my fingers underneath it, I am able to get it into this bowl of water. Tofu is stored in water in order to keep it from going bad. And tofu, fresh tofu, will last for about close to a week. But in order for it to last that long, What is necessary to do is change the water out every day or two.